So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit from my own personal history about what's going on in Iran right now, and in the context of Americans' ignorance of history, and particularly the history of our involvement in interfering with other countries, frequently for the profit of U.S. and multinational corporations, and how this has um, slapped us back in the face over and over and over again. So in 1979, I was 14 years old. I was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. My dad was a USAID employee, and I was attending the International School of Islamabad with a bunch of other diplomat and kids and from various countries and kids of employees of private corporations and other agencies that were working in Islamabad. And in the fall of 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran was in full swing. The hostages had been taken at the embassy there, and in fact, our school superintendent, Bill Keogh, um, he had previously been the superintendent of the Tehran International School, and he happened to be back in Tehran, I believe, for a conference or something, and he was taken hostage and spent those famous 444 days of captivity as a hostage in Tehran. Uh, so, in the midst of all this political upheaval, a group of Islamic radicals, and I'm not good on the various, all the various sects of who was fighting with who at the time, but they took over the Kaaba in one of the holiest sites of Islam in Mecca, and the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the leader in Iran at that time, um, declared that this takeover of the Kaaba was a Zionist American plot. That was not true at all. But this caused tremendous upheaval in many Islamic countries, including in Pakistan. And on November 21st, a huge mob formed in Islamabad, and I think in mobs formed in other cities in Pakistan too, but a huge mob formed in Islamabad and moved to attack the U.S. Embassy compound. Um, and in fact, they burned the embassy to the ground eventually. Several people were killed, several Pakistani employees at the embassy, a young Marine guard, Steve Crowley, who I actually knew slightly. He was 20 years old, so he was young enough to actually be dating um, a student at our high school. Uh, Brian Ellis, who was an Army officer of some sort working at the embassy, was killed. Um, and our school was also attacked. I realized a few years ago that I am one of the few people who was in a school shooting, which there wasn't even such a term back then. I was in a school shooting involving Islamic terrorists. There are not a lot of people that can wear that hat, and I imagine I probably know most of them. Um, so our school was attacked. We were we had been hustled into the auditorium at some point in the afternoon when we should have been getting on buses. There wasn't a very good explanation. There was something going on. We couldn't go back home right then. People were kind of whispering that they could see smoke coming from the city. We were a little outside of the city. I was on crutches at the time, Osgood-Schlatter syndrome. um, so I'm hobbling around on crutches, and then at some point, a bunch of noise and commotion starts, and they tell us to get out of the auditorium and run across to the gym and hide in the locker rooms. Um, so I'm running on crutches, and people are screaming and freaking out, and you can hear shots and glass breaking. We get into the gym. There was the library and the cafeteria were kind of adjacent to that, and they were shooting the windows out, I think, in the library or the cafeteria. So there's glass breaking, there's shots being fired. My friend Adam fell down. Turned out later he'd broken his arm. We crammed into the locker rooms, and people were screaming. We were trying to get the people who were screaming to be quiet so that we wouldn't get found. Fortunately, a couple of very brave employees of the school fended the attackers off, not with guns, but with cricket bats, in fact. The attackers were just some angry young men. It's always the angry young men from a nearby, I think a nearby college or something that I think really just wanted to do some property damage, and may not have even been aware that there were a lot of students at the school at the time. But anyway, they got scared off, and eventually things calmed down in the city. My dad actually drove out to the school to pick me up, even though he'd been told not to. We went back to the city. The next day was November 22nd. It was Thanksgiving. That was also my birthday. Very weird Thanksgiving and birthday, let me tell you. And during the course of that day, we were told that we could each pack 2 suitcases up, and we would be getting on a plane very early the next morning. Chartered 747, so all American employees in State Department and USAID, et cetera, employees in Pakistan were crammed onto this plane. And let me tell you, being on a 747 where you know half the people on there is a very weird thing. But anyway, we got home safe. And the reason I'm telling this sort of rather colorful story is to hopefully spin enough interest to have people look back and think about how we got to that situation in Iran. And the unfortunate fact of the matter is that a huge part of it was U.S. and British interference in Iranian affairs. Way back until the early part of the 20th century. I'm not a tremendous scholar of this, but it's a long, complicated history of interference. There was a royal family in Iran that were very repressive. Eventually, from the I think the 20s into the 1940s and 50s, the Iranian people started to gain a little more of a representative government, a parliament. And eventually a leader emerged, Mohammad Mossadegh, who was eventually rose to the position of prime minister. I believe I have this right. The royal family was still in place. The Shahs, and I think that Reza Pahlavi, who was the person that we think of as the Shah of Iran, I think took over in the mid 40s or something like that. But anyway, in 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh was elected as prime minister, and he believed that the Iranian people should control their own natural resources. Not a very radical idea, I don't think, but this was not well looked upon by the British petroleum company. I actually don't think it was British Petroleum at that point. I think it had a name like the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company or something like that. But this was a British-controlled company that was primarily profiting from the sale of Iranian oil. And they did not look fondly upon the Iranian people trying to take control of their own natural resources. And between the the British intelligence services and the CIA, they came up with a plot. I think it was called Operation Ajax, if I have that right. I can stand being corrected, I'm sure. But in any case, they came up with a plot to overthrow Mossadegh and essentially return control of the country to the Shah, which happened in 1953. And the reign of the Shah from the 50s into the 70s was incredibly repressive in terms of political speech. There was a veneer of sort of cosmopolitan westernization, which some wealthy Iranians remember fondly because people in power had a pretty good life, and unlike the theocratic administration that took over afterwards, women actually had more freedom of education and personal autonomy. Of course, if you were wealthy and if you were not in opposition to the Pahlavi regime. There was a brutal secret police called Savak who repressed any political dissent. And this laid the groundwork, of course, for the Islamic Revolution to follow. The people who were repressed were easily manipulated into supporting the idea that a theocratic regime would give them more rights. And I suppose for a little while it did, in terms of it gave poor people more rights than they had in the past. The unfortunate after effect was, of course, 50 years of brutal theocratic oppression that has continued to the present. I think what I wanted to illustrate here is that this incredibly short-sighted and clumsy action that the Trump administration is taking now, which I think should properly be referred to as Operation Epstein Fury, is not going to succeed because none of these operations have ever succeeded. Every interference that the U.S. has ever done like this, whether it was in Iraq, in Iran previously, in Chile, there's just too many to list. They have never ended with the country turning into a freedom-loving democracy. Never happens. Never, ever happens. And the blowhards, the blowhard Republicans in Congress and the ones that you see pounding their chests online about how, this is going to lead to freedom and peace in the Middle East, it's not going to happen. We know this. We've seen it before. And the blowback costs to the American people are always brutal. Always brutal. So read history, understand history, and don't fall for the bullshit.